Hello friends, as you all know, we are running a series on the short story, particularly in Europe, and today's subject is the short story by Flaubert, who is a French author. He is known for his novels and also for the short fiction to some extent. Today's speaker is Professor Payal Nagpal, who teaches English in Janaki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University. And she'll be talking about one of the stories of Flaubert. And in the 19th century, the French fiction, the short fiction particularly, came up later. Flaubert was in the middle of the 19th century, but immediately after that, or around the same time, there were great short story writers like Maupassant. You must have heard about him and his short stories. But the name of Flaubert generally does not belong to the short story in the critical sense. Critics do not generally talk about the one that Professor Payal Nagpal has chosen for discussion. Of course, is an important short story, but generally Flaubert is recognized as a novelist and a natural novelist, a naturalistic novelist, one who belongs to the details. He does not directly reflect the theme of the writing that he picks up for representation. So there are some issues with Flaubert, and he is a master of prose, but if a master of prose is rendered into another language, then there is another issue whether English can really bear the weight of the content of an author like Flaubert. All these issues occur when you discuss the short story of Flaubert. So I request Professor Payal Nagpal to begin the discussion, and let's see what she has to say and how it affects us intellectually. So, Professor Payal Nagpal, the floor is yours. Please begin.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. As mentioned, today's session is going to be on Gustave Flaubert's short story, A Simple Soul. Flaubert is, as rightly pointed out, is known for his novels primarily, and A Simple Soul is part of a collection called Three Tales. But it is a story that is important from the point of view of realism. It is a story that is important for the way in which Flaubert represents society. So we know, of course, a lot of information is available about Flaubert, that he was born in Hous in northern France. He was born around 1821 and lives on to about 1880. His father was a doctor, and his own understanding and knowledge of medical sciences is something that we see reflected in his writing. So one of the most important aspects, of course, about Flaubert is his contribution to French realism. The novels that he has written, the prose that he has written, makes French realism, especially around the middle of the 19th century, what it really is. In the context of France, we begin with Balzac and Stendhal, and we move to Flaubert. And this particular short story is interesting because it's written towards the absolute latter part of his writing career. So around 1877 is when this short story appears. So Flaubert, on the personal front, it's interesting to note that he never married, didn't have children, and we of course know of his relationship with Louis Collet and the letters that are still available. He is known for novels like Madame Bovary, published around 1857. It was serialized in the Revue de Paris, and after which he wrote another novel called Salammbô, which was published around 1863, and a very interesting novel. He's known primarily for Madame Bovary and the controversy that followed and the court case that followed. But another very important novel written by Flaubert and published around 1870 is Sentimental Education. Precision in writing is something that Flaubert is known for, and at times one reads phrases like the Flaubert barometer to, really speaking, assess writing. So when we look at, coming to the short story, A Simple Soul, one of the important questions that one needs to ask right at the beginning is whether he really means it to be a simple soul, or is there gentle irony, or or is he being harshly ironic? So this is of course for the readers and viewers today to decide what they think of it. But we will certainly put forth all the questions that come along with A Simple Soul. Um, Unlike a lot of the other short stories that we've discussed where there is a major turn of events and something really speaking happens, there is nothing of the sort that happens in this particular short story. In fact, it brings out somewhere the mundaneness of the life of the protagonist of this short story, that's Felicity. So it begins like this with for half a century the housewives had envied Madame Obin and her servant Felicity. So this story is about the life of the house help, the maidservant Felicity, and not just her relationship with the madam, that's Madame Obin, but also the relationship with people around, with the children in the house, and so this story covers the entire lifespan of Felicity from the moment she joins this particular household. Of course, we also get to know a little bit about her before she joins the Obin household, but it's the major part of the story is about her life there and right up to her death. So and how this is not just a simple soul, but a simple life in that sense. So if we expect any kind of cataclysmic event or a revolution or some affairs happening on the side, there's nothing of the sort that happens. It's a life of a very simple woman from the ordinary social group. So in fact, her life is defined as follows. For 100 francs a year, she cooked and did the housework, washed, ironed, mended, harnessed the horse, fattened the poultry, made the butter, and remained faithful to her mistress, although the latter was by no means an agreeable person. And we're talking about 100 francs a year. We know that, I was immediately reminded of Balzac's novel Old Goriot, where people who are staying in the Walkway, in the Maison Walkway, are people who have less than 1200 francs a year. And here is a woman who's only getting 100 francs a year. And the kind of work that she's doing is enormous. But she never once complains or thinks that, she's being underpaid or, she probably needs more. So we get to know a little bit right at the beginning about, her and about Madame Obin. And she joins the Obin household at a point when, Madame Obin had lost her husband. He had died in the beginning of 1809. One thing that's very, very striking about the story is the mentioning of dates. So pretty much from 1809 to the 1850s, that's the time period that we cover in a span of a short story. So she has these two children, and she's left with a number of debts, and so she sells off everything and retains just a farm at Gifosses, and an income of about 5,000 francs is what she has. And where, of course, Flaubert doesn't point out this disparity, but we think about 100 francs a year and we think about the money that Madame Obin has. So we get to know, and this is very typical of realism, of French realism, and of course of Flaubert's own very specific style, how the house is described, not just the house, wherever they go, whether it's the farm at Gifosses or it's by the seaside, all this is described in a very elaborate sort of manner. So for example, the house is described as follows, about how there is a narrow hall that separates the kitchen from the parlor, and Madame Obin, of course, sits there in a straw armchair near the window. 8 mahogany chairs stood in a row against the white wainscoting. Then there is an old piano beneath a barometer that's covered with a pyramid of old books and boxes. First floor was Madame's bedchamber. Again, one is totally reminded of the kind of detailing that we see in Flaubert's Madame Bovary, or the kind of detailing that we see in a Balzacian novel. So a large room peppered in a flowered design containing the portrait of Monsieur, dressed in the costume of a dandy. So we don't know much about her husband, except for the fact that he probably liked to follow the latest fashions, which is why he also kind of ended up in a lot of debt, and he did not repay that, and it fell on Madame Obin to do so. So actually, the protagonist here is not Madame Obin. The protagonist here is Felicity. But it's interesting how through the Felicity narrative, we also get some insight into Madame Obin. So then there is a parlor that's always closed, filled with furniture. So this kind of spatial detailing about the furniture, about what is kept over there, is there in a realist novel, and it's important because it builds up, it creates the entire milieu, and we get to know what lived lives were really speaking all about. So if Balzac has written something called the series that is called the Human Comedy, where he's attempting what he calls a history of manners. So I think realism as a movement, in terms of writing, surely does the same. So the woman here, that is Felicity, is shown to be something very simple, very little exposure to the ways of the world. We are given a little bit about her life, how her father was a mason, and he died when he fell off from a scaffolding. If you look at her description, she was clad in miserable rags, beaten for the slightest offense, and finally dismissed for a theft of 30 sows, which she did not commit. So this is when later she takes up a job after the death of the father, who's a mason. She took service on another poultry farm, where she tended the poultry, and as she was well thought of by her master, her fellow workers soon grew jealous. So here we see it's almost as if in a very, very totally dispassionate tone. I mean, if you really want to uh, understand what realism is all about, and the way in which the realist writers declare that they have to be at a distance from what is happening and maintain a very, very unbiased and objective stance, I think it's evident here. So where everything is described, Flaubert never kind of passes any kind of moral judgment on what he's describing to his readers. So, for instance, Felicity is, of course, living in this very, very, I mean, utter poverty, and she suddenly meets this man who courts her at the fair, and she's very delighted that somebody's giving her this kind of attention, but is absolutely aghast when a demand of physical intimacy is placed on Felicity, and the man, of course, is Theodore, and he runs away when Felicity starts to scream, and but later he again approaches Felicity, and the very fact that this simple woman, she cannot believe that anybody would actually want to marry her, and so she spurns all the advances that are made by Theodore, but he finally manages to convince her about his love for her and the fact that he would want to marry her. So he announces that he wants to kind of take a substitute against himself for the army, and informs her that she is to meet him at a designated time. And when she does wait for him, she's finally told that he had married a rich old woman, a Madame Lehosses of Thaux. So in this kind of a scenario, here is a woman who's kind of exploited by Theodore. She does not understand the ways of the world, and just around that time, she's standing in front of this inn, and she meets this woman, that's Madame Obin, who's wearing her widow's weeds, and upon questioning her, learned that she was looking for a cook. The girl did not know very much, but appeared so willing and modest that Madame Obin finally said, "Very well, I will give you a trial." Now, this is where, in a sense, the story picks up momentum, and how she's taken into the family, and she remains, she remains the house help. It's not as if that changes, despite her devotion and despite her complete dedication to the family. So this is where, in a sense, we get to know a little bit about Felicity's story, to the point that she comes to the Obin household. Here again, I would request Professor Prakash to share his views on what he really thinks about this kind of characterization. I mean, we don't generally get to know about women like Felicity, you know, they are generally not the protagonists. They might be there in the scene, but not as the primary protagonist.
No, the question is complex in the sense, you know, that friends, when a writer chooses to, make somebody, some woman, the protagonist, then one is supposed to, express and represent her psychology, her mental makeup, her moral landscape, and all those things. And very rightly, as Professor Payal Nagpal has pointed out, that there is a story, there is a woman. She has an experience, but she also has a history. And when that history is told in the beginning, that she came from such a family, and then she was looking for a job, and finally a house was found where she could just be an help. So these are actually when you are representing these things, then I thought that perhaps this is what French realism is. That one looks at the whole thing from the victim's point of view, in this case Felicity, and that she is looking not merely at men who might ditch her, and she is ditched also, but they also look at the other woman who belongs to the upper class. So maybe this is the reason why he called this short story a tale. It's a tale because it has a kind of introduction, a social introduction, which is directly addressed to the audience. And when that is done, after that, it becomes a story. So that kind of problematization of it, I think, would partly meet the inquiries that you have in mind. That he has a character, and that character has a past. So if you go into the past and if you represent it, if you explain through that the conduct that will follow the initial introduction, then it will expand into its scope and into its description. So characters choice, characters representation, and her experience in this case, and Madame Bovary you quoted, and she's also a woman. Here it's a clash between two women, and also a man and a woman, and that kind of clash is there in Madame Bovary also.
Yes.
So it's a very complex kind of a thing, and the questions that you raise are really very important.
And here too, I mean, it's written in a style that is very, very precise, but at the same time, it's not even, he does not allow his pen to kind of, raise any kind of excitement about anything. And that, of course, can be considered to be a problem also. But it's all very objective description that we actually get. So,
what do you say about the tale? Is it a tale or a short story? Is there a difference?
I would say it's a tale. I would say it's a tale because there's a it's not only because it has an introduction, but a short story almost in a sense appears to be a kind of fragment. In a sense, it's complete in itself, but it captures a specific moment. Now here, it captures a vast number of years in Felicity's life. So in that sense, I think I would go along with it being a tale.
Yes, it is definitely a tale, as you rightly point out, of course.
So Felicity is very invested in the family right from the beginning. The children are very small, and one covers a period from where the children are just about 1 and 4 years old, Paul and Virginia, and by the time we reach the end of this tale, we see them as one is of course married, and Virginia's she dies. So she's not very, she doesn't keep very good health. So, but right from the beginning, it's interesting to mark how Felicity never crosses the boundary of being the house help, yet she's totally invested in this house and totally invested in the lives of Paul and Virginia.
That's her vitality.
So that's her vitality.
Yes.
That's her vitality that defines her being. So we also get to know, for instance, a glimpse of what the market would be like. So every Monday morning, the dealer in second-hand goods who lived under the alleyway would spread out his wares on the sidewalk, and the city would be filled with the buzzing of voices in which the neighing of horses, bleating of lambs, and so on could be distinguished. So we see how people go to, and it's interesting that it's the dealer of second-hand goods, how people go there to buy what they require. Similarly, pastoral spaces are described very beautifully. So the farm that's there at Jeffers', there is a very major episode that takes place there, the episode of the bull that attacks the family, and how very bravely Felicity knows that it is her duty to protect everyone. And she's throwing sand at the bull's eyes, and she manages to save the life of Madame Obey, the two children, and just about manages to scrape through and save her own life.
You talked about her commonplace background, but this is very heroic, the way
Yes.
she protects the family.
This episode particularly, if one reads the description, is extremely heroic. And at the same time, what's very important here is that despite this episode being so very heroic, where Felicity is completely clear, there's not even a moment of doubt in her mind about saving the family. But she never recounts this incident, or she never behaves in a way as if she has saved the family and that she is entitled.
It's a part of her blood.
It's a part of her
Her
blood.
being,
It's her
as you say.
duty. It's
Yes,
her
yes.
being, and that's something that's very remarkable about her. But and that's where I think Flaubert presents Felicity's characterization, the simplicity in her, in a very significant way, which is where I think before we actually think that this is being harshly ironic, one needs to probably think that Flaubert is doing something else here.
And as you emphasize this, there is a kind of antagonism between the outside world, which is driven by the market forces, and there is her inner self, which is more humane, which is more deep, which is more sympathetic, compassionate, and absolutely modest.
In fact, she's away from the lure of the market forces, and if anything, she's drawn towards the Christian thought, towards especially as Virginia kind of undergoes her rituals and everything. So she's more drawn towards the communion and the church. So if we look at this episode, how Felicity turns around through patches of grass in the bullseye, he hung his head, shook his horns, and it just goes on, and how Felicity continued to back before the bull, blinding him with dirt, while she shouted to them to make haste. And so Madame Obey and the children, they slide into a ditch, and manage to save their lives. And the bull, of course, had driven Felicity up against a fence, and she just manages to kind of make her way inside the fence, and that saves her life. But this was an absolutely heroic episode, and I think Flaubert writes in a way pretty much the way in which the protagonist, that is Felicity, understands it to be. She just takes it in her stride, and the narrative style also kind of takes it in its stride to express, I think the two here blend, to make us understand how for Felicity it's part of her duty. It's not something that she's going to make a big noise about. So I think this is a central episode in this particular tale.
So friends, as you know, we have already known the character of this particular person, the woman called Felicity, and of course the background is the mid 19th century France. So one can take off from here, and one can go forward into the internal nature, the internal being of this person, and who is far superior to her mistress, who is far superior to others, the men that she comes across, and the way they deceive her. All this is shown in great detail, I hope, in the second part, when Professor Payal Nagpal discusses the theme and thematic value of this character. So I think we want to know, we want to understand the inner conflict that might be there, hidden somewhere in the layers of her mind, Felicity's mind, and it's really a great example of French fiction, and particularly short fiction. Thank you.